thank you to everyone who's joining currently. We're going to give it a few more minutes just for some more attendees to join the webinar. Maybe get started around 7:03. I'll kick off the introductions. We're going to give it one more minute for attendees, and then we'll get started.
29 attendees, so it's great.
Okay. We have a total of 33 attendees. One just joined. Very exciting. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. My name is Joshua. I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's webinar. I'd like to welcome you and thank you just for taking your time to participate tonight in this webinar. This is part of our ongoing effort to provide residents with clear, factual information about the FY28 override. I want to give some notes about some housekeeping real quick. So first off, this webinar is being recorded. We are live on RCTV. We are live on their YouTube page. We are live on Xfinity 22, FiOS 33, and FiOS 2131. This recording will be uploaded to the website tomorrow morning, along with the presentation that we present. Moving on, we have 3 committees and boards that were called or that posted agendas. So at this time, if you are a member of the select board, of the school committee, and the finance committee, I want to ask you to raise your hand. I'm going to unmute you, and then I'm going to ask the chairs to do a roll call attendance. We're going to start with the select board, then we'll go to school committee, and then finance committee. But I will give a second for everyone to raise their hand and see if we have a quorum.
Look, it's just select board.
I don't know.
I think
Do we
it's
have a
select board.
quorum?
Yeah, the
Select board we do.
Oh, we do. Oh, thank you. I'm just looking at the attendees. Thank you. You can go, Melissa. Yeah.
Sorry. Calling the select board meeting of August 6th to order. Chris Healy.
Here.
Aaron Rose Gillis.
Here.
Melissa Murphy here.
At this point, FinCom doesn't need to be called to order. There's only three of us that I can see,
Okay.
unless somebody is here with a phone with a name that does not match. I think it's just me, Ed, and
Okay.
my co-chair. So yeah, I don't see anyone else.
Okay. I mean, that's okay. All right. We will move on. Lastly, some Zoom webinar tips. So pretty much following the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions. Please use the Q&A feature throughout the presentation anytime to put your questions. If you would rather speak at the end of the presentation, we'll get to the Q&A. I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you want to speak, and I'll unmute you and you can ask your question to all the panelists. And then lastly, we do have closed captions. So if you do need closed captions, there should be a closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If it's not there, it might be under the More section with the three dots. Yeah, I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it over to Jane Wellman, our town manager.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. All right. Well, thank you. As Josh said, I appreciate everybody giving some time tonight to join us for this webinar. This is the first of what will be many public engagement sessions. We'll be doing in person, we'll be doing online, we'll be doing hybrid meetings, we'll be doing Saturday ones. If you want to meet another time, we can do that too. I do hold office hours regularly, and we will be doing updates at the select board meetings, and I believe also the finance committee meetings, Madam Chair, for the override, each one of those meetings. Yeah, okay. And then we'll also be doing the lunch and learn down at the Pleasant Street Center. We've scheduled these for multiple days at multiple times to meet people where they are. That is one of our ethics, to try and reach people in all the ways that we can. Next slide, please. So what's the bottom line? Why are we here tonight? We've been putting together our FY28 budget about 6 months. We started it about 6 months early. Our proposed level 2 budget is a 3.75% increase. What's a level 2 budget? A level 2 budget, level 1 budget is when the department heads come in and ask for their requests. The level 2 budget is when the town manager goes through it and makes cuts or adjustments or increases depending on what they see the need is. That's the level 2 budget. Level 3 is when it goes then to the select board and then the finance committee and then the one that ends up in front of town meeting. So there's a 5-step process we go through. Level 2 is where we are right now. What this level 2 budget would do is maintain the investments we've made in education over the years with a 5.25% increase. And that is achieved through a community priority of $917,000. So what that means is in the baseline budget, everybody, town and schools, has a 3.75% increase. That $917,000 added in as a community priority is what gets the schools to their request level. We're looking at a proposed override of $6.5 million as voted by the select board to put on the November 3rd ballot this year. At $6.5 million, we will still be looking to use $3 to $3.3 million free cash to fulfill that level 2 budget. We have talked about with the select board phasing that in over 2 years, potentially lessen the burden. That hasn't been decided yet. And this override at this level will last likely 3 to 5 years. And it's very dependent on inflationary pressures that we see, if they are continuing in upward momentum or if they begin to stabilize at a lower level. Currently, I think we're carrying very conservative estimates on health insurance increases, for example. We recently renegotiated our health insurance, so potentially that won't be as high. Next slide, please. What are some of the cost drivers that we're facing? And like many people in the community, you've seen increases like this too. But the first one, maybe not. So there have been decades of insufficient local aid from Beacon Hill. You'll see potentially a slide later that looks at what Chapter 70 and UGA, which stands for Unrestricted General Government Aid. These are funds for schools. These are funds for the town side that come from the state. And they've been horrifically underfunded since the Great Recession. and many, many years of 0 and 1% increases. And so the state aid is not keeping up with inflation at all. And it's decades, it's at least 20 years of this sort of behavior from the state. The Massachusetts Municipal Association released a study last fall about how this has been insufficiently done. And there's quite a bit of data. If you go to mma.org, you can read that report for yourself. So that's part of the problem. A second problem, in FY27, we had to negotiate a new 5-year contract for trash and recycling hauling. Previously, we had a 10-year contract with JRM that was very favorable to the town, and that environment doesn't exist anymore 10 years later. And so that contract was competitively bid. We spent a year on the proposal working with state and local partners, and we got a good price for where we are in the market, but it was still a 39.5% increase over FY26. So we are decreasing that by about 8% for FY28 by removing weekly recycling and moving to biweekly. Originally, that was part of the plan, which is why those 96-gallon recycling carts were initially distributed and decided on that purchase back when Fidel Maltese was the town manager. So we knew that this might happen because we've seen the projections of trash and recycling contracts, but that represents, weekly recycling represents about $500,000. We've seen inflationary pressures driving up fuel costs, labor costs, which hit every single one of our contracts, and our benefits. Health insurance, I mentioned previously, has skyrocketed in recent years and adds a tremendous amount of uncertainty. So we've been holding 10% increases for the next few years as we do our projections. We've also had significant software expenditures, including building security, computer-aided dispatch, and parking enforcement. The computer-aided dispatch is in the process of being deployed right now, and it hasn't been updated in decades. What our dispatchers, our police and fire have been able to do with such an outdated dispatch system is truly remarkable. But that was a long time overdue purchase, and it was, I think, made last year. And so now we're in the implementation. And then insurance policies for our new buildings are estimated at $230,000. So that's what happens when you build new buildings. Your property and casualty insurance goes up significantly. So those are some of the big cost drivers that we're seeing on the town side. Next slide, please. So what have we done so far? We didn't just decide, hey, we're going to come to the residents and ask for a tax increase. That would be irresponsible, and that's not how we roll. So we've started with renegotiating our health insurance agreement with our Public Employee Committee. PEC is a public employee committee. Health insurance in municipalities has to be bargained with our unions. The PEC is made up of representatives of each one of our bargaining units, and they get a say in how health insurance works, and it's voted on. It's also voted on by the select board. Our PEC came to the table this year motivated and ready to work with the town to do a significant change, the first significant plan change we've seen in 20 years. And so that's really quite remarkable. For the first time, employees are paying deductibles. Co-payments have shifted. We've been able to offer more savings to employees as well. Because we've modernized the plan, it actually reduced our increase, was going to be something like 14%. And so that's shared by employees in the town. And we reduced that to, I think, 5.17%. Sharon, you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
About 5.1, yes.
Okay, thank you. So we're projecting to save $3.9 million over the 3 years of this contract. So this is a tremendous win, and we appreciate and grateful for our employees who came to the table to do that work. And we moved very quickly early in the spring to do that, recognizing that all of our labor contracts are coming up for negotiation this year. Another thing that we did earlier this year was renegotiated our property and casualty insurance and started looking at that competitively. And we actually had a reduction in our property insurance. That'll be offset by the increases we'll see from the new buildings, but those don't come online until FY28. We are leaving some positions unfilled. Right now, I have instituted a hiring freeze. Part of the reason for that is because I'm concerned about the FY27 budget, because we're using 6.475 in free cash this year to balance the budget, and I don't want to go anywhere over that. So that's a concern. And I want to make sure that we're not hiring people to lay them off maybe in 9 months. So that's a factor. I apologize again for my dog. We've increased fees. We've cut office supplies by 10%. We've reduced our capital budget from 5% to 4.5%. For folks that don't know, one of the ethics that Reading has is one of our policies is that we always invest upfront in our capital budget. We always work to take care of our infrastructure at the beginning of our budget process. So we invest 5%. For FY27, we're reducing that by 0.5%. And then another bright spot on the horizon is that our pensions will be fully funded by FY32. They'll be 100% funded by FY32. And so we understand that will make available about $3 million for operational expenses by FY32. And that will take some pressure off the budget at that time. So those are some of the things that we've done so far. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Jane. So I'm going to go over this slide. This is our reserve status. So the last time free cash, which is what we call our reserves, free cash, it's a very complicated name, not really free, but it's kind of like our retained earnings, so to speak. The last time free cash was certified was July 1st, 2025 at just over $17.3 million. And since it's been certified, we've had several uses at November and April town meeting, resulting in about $8.5 million worth of free cash use, leaving us with about $8.7 million remaining. We have estimated revenue regeneration, which means that we have a balanced budget. Revenues equal expenses. We budget, equal to the revenues that we have expenses. So anything that we receive for revenue above what we projected is regeneration. Same is true for expenses. Anything that we don't spend actually goes to regeneration for free cash. So right now it's kind of early in our process to determine what the free cash is. It usually gets done around October. So I've made estimates of revenue regeneration at $3.89 million and about $1 million from the expense side, giving us about $13.63 million of free cash. We also maintain a little over $2 million of stabilization funds and FinCom reserves of $200,000, giving us just under $16 million of estimated reserves. That represents about 11.98% of our net available revenues for fiscal 27. FinCom does maintain a policy that we maintain at least 7% in reserves. And so that's a baseline number. However, bond rating agencies, we are a AAA bond rated community, expect our reserve level to be more in the area of 15 to 20%. And so this 12% is less than ideal. We want to maintain that AAA bond rating as we're borrowing kind of the largest amounts of debt that we've ever had to borrow for Killam and Recal. So this is why the override is happening in fiscal 28 to try and maintain our level of reserves at the level that we need to maintain that AAA bond rating. Next slide, please. This slide shows in blue our actual reserves and red is our 7% minimum. And as you can see in the past, our actuals have been well above the 7%. However, in recent years, we've been using a lot more free cash to balance the operating budget because so many items were growing by double-digit percentages. And we needed to fill that hole with free cash so as to, extend out the need for an override. So we've been using a lot more free cash in recent years just to get us through the inflationary pressures that we've been facing. So you can see that fiscal 26 and 27 are still estimates, and I show you down the bottom of the slide that that $3 million regeneration is what we tend to default to when we estimate regeneration. $3 million is somewhat of a low number for us, and so we do that as a conservative estimate. In fiscal 26, we did use $8.57 million of free cash, which is roughly half of our free cash, which is astonishing. We had snow and ice come in at over $1 million. It was definitely a rough year. And then for fiscal 27, we're estimating uses of 6.475. If all that came to fruition exactly as I explained it, we would be ending fiscal 27 with just about 7% in reserves, which is less than ideal for our bond rating. Next slide, please. This slide shows us in blue our free cash and reserves in the blue line. The red line would be our regeneration. And you can see in the past, we regenerated in most years well more than what we used. In recent years, we've started to see that we're using more than we regenerate. You can see that fiscal 23, 24, 25, we're growing above the regeneration number, which is depleting our reserves. Next slide, please. So this slide is meant to show you what's grown outside of what we can afford. It's our structural deficit. And so this slide is our accommodated cost. And what those are costs that we take off the top before we split the money between the town and the schools. So the way we do our budget process is we project our revenues first, and then we project our accommodated cost. Our accommodated costs are things like benefits, capital, debt, energy, out-of-district special ed, veterans aid, property and casualty insurance. You'll see as we go through all different sorts of categories. And it's a lot of things that we have a little less control about what they end up costing. So we have some control, but not a lot of control. And so we take them off the top because we have to pay for them. So this slide is meant to show you over the course of fiscal 20 to fiscal 26, actual costs. So you can see how each line item has grown from fiscal 20 to fiscal 26. So these are the actual expenses. So you can see under the benefits section, benefits was $16.9 million in fiscal 20, but in fiscal 26 it had grown to 25 million, over 25 million, which is $8 million more than $8 million more than fiscal 20 and 71.75% in growth in 7 years. So the next column shows you what we would expect. We would expect most years to be 2.5% to 3%. We are a Prop 2.5 community. The whole state of Massachusetts, we're kind of bound by Prop 2.5. So what we can afford is usually about 2.5% to 3%. So that next column is what my expectation would have been, which is about 17.5% for a 7-year period. And the difference between the net change and that expectation is your structural deficit. It's the amount that these line items went up above that 17.5%. So in benefits, we're looking at $5,239,000 of structural deficit built in the benefits area. In the area of debt, you see almost $1 million. Energy, about $576,000. Next slide, please. Financial is where our property and casualty is, and our veterans assistance, that's about $305,000. Out-of-district special ed, $508,000 above that 17.5% that we would have expected. The vocational schools, about $1 million. We do actually have a capital charge in there for the new school in Wakefield, and that's growing. Our debt service is growing each year because we're increasing enrollment. It seems like we're getting more and more kids over there, and it makes our capital charge each year because it's a pro rata share of their enrollment. So we had started off with about $260,000 in capital, and now we're at like $340,000. So it keeps increasing as our students start to migrate to that new school. Rubbish is up $364,000 above that 17.5%. And that's without that 39.5% increase for fiscal 27. That's not included in these numbers. Snow and ice was a very rough year. It was $1.5 million in fiscal 26. So we had $834,000 in difference there. State assessments, just about 64,000. That one's the most behaved out of most of the things we're looking at here. So grand total, the structural deficit between fiscal 20 and fiscal 26 is almost $10 million, $9.88 million. So that's kind of where we're at. These accommodated costs have grown more than 17.5% in a 7-year period. Some of them astronomically, as you saw, benefits was at 75% increase over 7 years. That's not affordable in a Prop 2.5 budget. Next slide, please. So this is the history of our Prop 2.5 votes. So back in 1993, we got just over $2.4 million in an override, and we made that last for 10 years. Back in 2003, we got $4.5 million in an override, and we made that last for 15 years. And then in 2018, we got a smaller override at 4.15, which we've made last 9 years. It'll be 9 years for fiscal 28. Next slide, please. So this slide tells you what the impact of a $6.5 million override would be on the average single family home. So we see that the assessed value, the average single family home is $944,193. Now I just want to notate that if you were to look this up in the comparative data on DLS, it might give you a different number. It will say $939,783. This $944,193 comes from their override impact calculator, which gives you the gross average value of the home. That slide that you'll find on our website that gives you a $939,783 is the average home, which is not a big difference, about $4,000, is net of exemptions. So I just want to make a point if people notice that there's a variation in the values, if you're looking at the compared to other communities, that particular slide that you see on our website, that is based on net of exemptions. So senior tax relief or veterans exemptions, those sorts of things. Whereas this number is before those are deducted. So there's just a slight variance there. Fiscal 26, the average tax bill was $10,348, but it did not include any of the debt exclusions. So in fact, fiscal 26, all of our debt exclusions had fallen off and nothing had been added. So it was a good year. We didn't have any debt exclusions added. However, fiscal 27, as you guys opened your bills this year, the first tranche of debt for Killam and Recal would have hit your bills, and it would have been about $60.19 per $100,000, or about $568 for the average home. The impact of an override for that same average home would be about $736.47, which is about 78 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. Next slide, please. This slide shows you what we're up against if the override does not pass. In order to do a 3.75% budget, this slide shows you how many positions or position equivalent cuts we would need to make be based on the small level of free cash that we can actually afford at this point, because we've pretty much exhausted our excess reserves. So for instance, if we used $3 million without an override, we would need to cut 67 positions across town and school. Now, the way that this is broken out on this table, it's actually represented in graphical form and table form. It's showing if we were to split the cuts the way we split the money. So when we're splitting the money between the school and the town, when we're creating our budget, it's split about 63-36 or 64-36%, roughly. So if we were to take those cuts in that same percentage, it would be 43 cuts on the school and 24 cuts on the town side. If we were to split the cuts as equally as we could, it'd be 34 cuts for the school and 33 for the town. And so those are some pretty drastic numbers. Down below, you can see that the average employee is about 85,000 on the town side, about 100 on the school side, but roughly each person is worth about 100,000. So we would have to cut that many equivalent positions to make that budget work. So roughly, if you were looking at the town side, if we were to cut 67 positions it would be roughly, let's see, for the town side, a 9.6% reduction if we did it 36.4%, and 13.3% if we did a 50-50 split of those cuts. On the school side, that same $3 million, that same 67 cut, if they did 43, that would be a cut of 6.9% of their staff, and 5.5 if we did a 50-50 split of those cuts. So those are very impactful cuts that we would need to make, and they would definitely impact service levels to a level that most residents would notice. And so it's important that we're very clear about what the no override budget looks like, and that's what this slide is meant to represent. Obviously, if we went with 4 million, we still need to cut 53 positions, which is quite a bit. So this is a tough situation we find ourselves in, given that we just had the 2 debt exclusion votes, but inflation has not been kind to our budget. And so that's why we're here. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn it over to the school department for their budget presentation.
Thanks, Sharon. Hello, my name's Henry Turner. I'm the new superintendent here in Reading. I started on July 1st, and since day one, I've been working very closely with Jane and her team on this topic. I'm joined today by School Committee Chair Sean Brandt and our Finance Director Phil Littlehale, and we're going to speak about the impacts of the FY28 budget as it would be connected to this override ballot vote. Next slide, please. The overall story that I've learned in my only 1 month of being here in Reading is that there's a lot of pride in the amount of improvement and growth that has happened in Reading. There's been a lot of work that has been done on the instructional side, on the academic side, and what you'll see in the next few slides is that improvement that our students are doing in the classrooms with their teachers. And it's been led by some really targeted investments during this time. And so what we will talk about in this presentation is 4 different quadrants. One is to show you that Reading during this time of academic improvement has also remained fiscally responsible. We have stayed below the state average on per pupil expenditure. And also this current or coming school year, fiscal year 27, there's actually a reduction in terms of our budget. And in order to meet the need, we are utilizing non-reoccurring funds, $800,000. That's the reason for the FY28, the need for the community priority of $917,000 in order for us to remain level service. What you also see is that while there's been some targeted investments in terms of teachers, administrators, counselors, we've remained flat in terms of support staff, custodians, and central administration. You'll also see that we've increased some revenue by increasing our school choice program and tuitioning the students. You'll also see tonight in that what those targeted investments look like and how they've impacted our students and how our students are performing, which is really impressive, to the point that now Reading is at the 90th percentile in terms of academic attainability and outcomes in comparison to the rest of the state. That's significant improvement, probably one of the fastest growing districts over the last few years. It's something to be proud about, celebrate. You'll learn why a 5.25% increase is considered level service for our schools for FY28, and you'll hear about the reductions that would occur if we had a failed override. And as Sharon said, it would certainly be impactful. Right now, we are seeing that salaries represent about 81% of our overall budget. So there's not a lot of other areas where a reduction can occur. And so no matter, so with a failed override, there will be staffing reductions or would be staffing reductions. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you the fiscal responsibility that's happened over the last few years. And it's really been focused on being mindful of Costs. There's been a lot of spending consolidation, reduction of professional development, of, um, how we are subscriptions that are being used in the classrooms. We've already put a pause on some of those payments and some of the educational platforms that we're using. So some of those pauses have already happened. Some of those freezes have already happened. We've also generated revenue. So this is one example. School choice is something that began in 2023 in Reading. And this is a demonstration that families want to, from outside of Reading, want to send their students to the Reading Public Schools. This is the tuition revenue that we've generated over that time. And as I shared in my previous slide, is that while we have made some targeted investments, we've also stayed flat in areas such as administration, paraprofessionals, custodians, and administrative assistants. Next slide, please. So this shows our net revenue in terms of our students who are tuitioned in for special education, which is also another demonstration that families want to send outside of Reading want to send their students to the Reading Public Schools. The special education students who we are receiving does not force us to create any new programs. So those students are not taking seats away from Reading residents. They're filling seats that are open. We are receiving tuition from the sending district and any additional support that is needed for those students. And so this is something that we've seen an increase in. We had a target we built an 18 to 22-year-old program. And so in special education, some students continue their education all the way through 22 years old. And so we have started a program. We anticipated it to be small. We've actually exceeded the number of students that we thought that we had planned on having. So that as a demonstration, again, that families are interested in sending their students to the Reading Public Schools. And so it's been an added sense of revenue for us. The slide on the right shows where we are spending more than we had been before, and that's in athletics. Due to transportation costs, due to increases in coaching stipends, we've seen a significant increase in terms of what our spend is on athletics. And this is even with having fees that students and families are paying for athletics. So we've seen a net increase in terms of the cost that we are spending on. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you what I was sharing at the beginning, is that I think our story in Reading is that one is that we are a desirable community, and some of the previous slides just shared that. And it's because our students are excelling. Over the last few years, there have been investments in terms of teachers, assistant principals, administrators, counselors, and that has led to academic attainment for our students. And so the slide on the right shows you the percentage of students who are meeting and exceeding on MCAS grades 3 through 8. And this shows you that our students by 2025 are now in the 90th percentile in terms of academic outcomes. You'll see that in 2018, we were hovering around 75%, 83% on the state average. So that now that we are in the top, really 90th percentile, top 10% statewide in terms of how our students are attaining, that's really something to be proud of. The slide on the left shows you our per pupil expenditures in comparison to some similar communities. What you'll find is that we continue to have one of the lowest levels of per pupil expenditures. We're well below the state average, even though we have increased over that time. And so what I would share is that that level of increase that has happened is really targeted towards that staff that I was just explaining. It clearly has made a demonstrable improvement in terms of how our students are performing. So I'd lastly just say on this slide is that I think what I've learned from families, from teachers already, is that there's a lot of sense of pride in terms of the direction that the school district is going. There is something to be proud about, and that we're sort of in the middle of that story. We are not at the end. There's a lot more growth for our students to improve, a lot more work for us to do in our school district to support students, so we can see more students achieving at a very high level. I'm going to pass it to School Committee Chair Sean Brandt, who's going to talk about the next couple slides.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Turner. So as he mentioned, we really feel like we're getting excellent results from what is comparatively a fairly modest per pupil spending level. I do want to spend just a few minutes talking about some of the investments we've made over recent years and the progress that's resulted from those investments. We launched an early literacy screener for all K through 3 students because we know how critical it is that kids develop those foundational reading skills in the early years. And we are seeing positive momentum and scores in those screenings. We also invested in high quality curriculum with ARC Core for ELA and illustrative math, and we're seeing fantastic results in the MCAS scores in recent years. So as Dr. Turner alluded to on the prior page, in each of the last 2 years, our achievement scores in grades 3 through 8 were 90% or better in ELA and 89% in math. We're also one of only 8 districts in the state to have student growth percentiles, which essentially measure how much growth students are exhibiting year over year, of 50 or higher in both math and ELA, and we've seen that result for each of the last 2 years. Nearly all of our schools are at or near all-time highs in school accountability, which measures our success against specific growth targets. We've also added some roles in targeted areas, or in some cases added hours to make existing roles full-time, including assistant principals, adjustment counselors, and school psychologists. These roles are critical not only for the social emotional support of students, but they also free up teachers and principals to focus on instruction, which we think is a huge contributor to some of the academic progress that we're seeing. We completed a round of program reviews for our special education programs recently and made targeted investments to address the recommendations stemming from those reviews, which has improved the quality and effectiveness of our programs, which really allows us to better serve students with special needs here in the district and reduce our reliance on expensive out-of-district placements over time. At the high school, we introduced innovation pathways and dual enrollment courses, which are expanding the options for students to pursue high-quality high school curriculum aligned with their interests and career goals. We'll have 296 students at RMHS participating in career pathways this upcoming school year, and we're also seeing admissions to some of the most selective colleges and universities tick up in recent years. So we feel really good about the progress that has been made and are confident that the targeted investments we've made are playing a critical role in driving that progress. But let me transition now to the next slide, and I want to talk about where that leaves us from a budget perspective on the school side. All of those investments I just discussed were made in prior years. And here, as we sit in FY27, we have a level service budget. So there were no ads entering FY27. And while we're talking about an override to support the FY28 budget, the truth is that even achieving level services in FY27 required us to use some one-time funds to balance the budget. We used about $800,000 in non-recurring funds, and the result of that is that a level services budget in FY28 actually requires support for the $917,000 community priority that I believe was Jane or Sharon alluded to earlier, to support a 5.25% increase to the operating budget. I want to be clear, though, this doesn't mean that our spending increases by 5.25% in FY28. What it means is that that's the amount that it takes to offset the reduced ability to use one-time funds that we tapped into in FY27 and can't go back to in FY28. If we go to the next slide, Josh, I will just share a little bit about what does change in our spending, as well as the offsetting revenue that comes from various programs we host in the district. So what drives the increase year over year that requires a budget increase to provide level services? Again, no added positions. So this is a level services budget we're talking about. But we do have significant exposure to collective bargaining, which drives both cost of living adjustments and lane changes for staff who gain more tenure. We're entering a collective bargaining year, so we've made modest assumptions about the upcoming contracts that we will have to settle. But those are reflected in assumptions here and are just sort of part of having a budget that is 81% personnel. We do also have non-personnel increases of $274,000 in this budget. And I want to highlight a couple of the drivers there. One is curriculum. So, I talked about the literacy and math programs and curriculum that we've implemented in recent years. This isn't like when, most of us who are on this call went to school, where new curriculum meant you buy a bunch of books and, they get passed down from kid to kid over the course of a decade or more. Curriculum today is largely digital. There's frequent material refresh. There's subscription and licensing fees. There's job embedded coaching to support teachers when they are delivering that curriculum. And so there is an $85,000 increment in FY28 to continue supporting the excellent curricular materials that we've implemented. Technology renewal, again, this is mostly a reflection of inflation and sort of everything in life getting more expensive lately. But versus $143,000 in FY27, we're looking at $200,000 in FY28 to support our technology refresh cycle, which allows us to ensure that we have technology that works, that functions well, that supports the academic mission of the schools, and doesn't result in disruptions to that. There are other items in there, but probably the next largest one in this bucket would be regular day transportation. Transportation, unfortunately, is a space where there is very, very little competition. If I'm not mistaken, I think the last time we did an RFP for transportation vendors, we got one bid. And so this is not a place where you have 4, 5, 6 bids competing heavily against each other to win the business. And in FY28, we anticipate $46,000 for regular day transportation. The flip side of this is some of the things that you might think of as additional revenue or incremental revenue. We call them offsets in the context of the school budget. So they are offsets to what otherwise would come out of the operating budget. Some of those buckets include school choice, which Dr. Turner alluded to. School choice is reflective of students in neighboring districts, staff, children of staff, et cetera, who are opting to come into Reading and are choosing to come to Reading because they want the educational opportunities available here. We make those spots available very selectively where we have space, and bringing in additional students won't impact, our space constraints, won't impact the students who are already here in Reading. But each of those students brings revenue with them that helps us offset some of our operating costs. In addition to the sort of core school choice revenue, there's also a special education increment. So when a student comes into Reading through school choice and has a particular accommodation from a special education perspective, the funding for that accommodation comes with that student as well and becomes part of our revenue source. A couple of years ago, we started hosting the Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, run by the SEAM Collaborative. We used existing space in the district at Wood End, and that brings revenue to us annually of about $40,000 to use space that would otherwise likely go unused for instructional purposes. We do have 3 students from other districts who are out of district placements into Reading in some of our special education programs. So I alluded to some of the targeted investments we made to ensure that we've got special education programs that meet the needs of our students. We also are generating revenue from students coming in from other districts whose needs can't be met in their home districts. All of the other offsets in our budget would be level funded. There are some exceptions, and these are some of the ones that we referred to that were sort of one-time funds that we can't go back to the well, so to speak. Rise Preschool, full day kindergarten, and the prior year school choice offsets. We have to take a decrease in those of $473,600 from FY27 because we essentially had to lean into them more heavily than we would have liked to level the budget for FY27. So that's a little bit about what drives a 5.25% increase from a budget perspective, which again is not representative of a 5.25% increase in spending. I believe I'm handing it off to Phil from there, or Dr. Turner, are you jumping back in?
Yes, Phil's going to present the next slides. Thank you.
Yes, I get to do all the happy slides. So we look at now the next one. What the no override means is that we'd have to find approximately $4.4 to $4.2 million of expenses we would have to reduce. And as Dr. Turner alluded to earlier, just over 81% of our expenses are in staff. That leaves 19% as non-staff, but also within that 19%, that includes our out-of-district special ed tuition, which we can't touch because we're legally obligated to provide the special ed students with their education that is free and appropriate to them. So that's $5 million out of that other 19% that we can't touch. So as we go through a look at the overall budget, we get forced really to look at the vast majority of where we can come with cuts has to come out of personnel. And so that's sort of the message that comes out of this. There are also other places that we can look, and I will get into that when I talk about the non-staffing impact. Now, if you look at the staffing reductions, we've made some assumptions as to what the average salary is. So for a teacher, it's around $100,000. For the paraprofessionals, around $32,000. And for the administrators, again, it's around 100,000. But one of the things we need to keep in mind is we talk about the teachers under the CBA, it's last in is the first out. And the newer hires tend to be coming in at salaries that are below the 100,000. So that means if you look at the salaries, 15 may not be the right number. It may have to be more than that. And so again, we have to look at, as we get through this, how is this all going to work out? So again, we're using an assumption of 100,000, but again, last in is first out. But I also wanted to bring up, one of the things in terms that we're doing right now for fiscal year 27 is that when we are doing new teacher hirings, the principals are working on hiring new teachers at nothing at a salary that doesn't exceed the master step 3, which is around $77,000. Even if the person that they're replacing was making 95,000, they're still being held to the 75,000. That is a way for us to try to keep our hands around the salary expense and get some savings in that as we go through the course of fiscal year 27. We go on the paraprofessionals. The average is about 32,000, and that's based on the hires that we've made over the last 3 years. So that's a pretty good number that we can go with. And then again, with the administrators, it's the same thing. The 100,000 is probably a good number that we can go with. It's really the variability with the educators that's going to really drive what the number is that we have to reduce if we come to that point, if we don't get the override in. On the non-staffing side, there are some things that we can do. As we saw earlier, we've done as a district some good work over the last number of years of generating revenue from other sources to help offset our expenses. One of the things that we don't like to do, but that we may have to do, would be to increase the fees again for extracurriculars and athletics. We did that for fiscal year 27, but they were very modest increases, somewhere between 2.5% to 5%. And that's the first time in a couple of years that they had been raised. We'd have to be looking at something significantly above that in order to generate some additional revenue. And that then brings up issues of in terms of equity, in terms of athletics for kids who can afford it or not be able to afford the fees to play sports. We'd be looking at probably increasing our facility rental fees. And again, that's going to be a balancing act because we don't raise them so high that people stop using our facilities. Yet on the other hand, we would need to be able to raise it at some percentage, be able to generate some additional income to the district. Reinstating full day kindergarten tuition, that one has popped up. That's something to be considered. As we know that we were bringing in about 5-6 years ago, 1.2 million a year in kindergarten tuition, and now we bring in nothing. And so, but that's been absorbed both through in the school side in terms of covering some of those expenses, as well as some increases from our allocation from the town in order to make that a reality. That was something that I think the school committee heard very loudly from many of the parents out there, that they wanted the full day kindergarten and they didn't want to have tuition, because I think right now, and Sean, you can probably correct me, I think there's 15 or 16 districts left in the state that is still charging for full day kindergarten. And we, wouldn't look forward to going back into that group, I think. Another thing that we're looking at would be to delay purchasing of new laptops. Right now, we're on a replacement program that every 4 years, a device is expected to last 4 years and then it gets replaced. We would have to push it out to probably 5 years in order to eliminate doing any purchasing in fiscal year 28. Pausing the prepay of out-of-district tuition. What we were able to do under Massachusetts law is if you have money left in a current fiscal year, you are allowed to use that money to prepay tuition for your out-of-district special ed students to certain programs. And we've been able to do that the last 4 or 5 years. We've been averaging somewhere between $800,000 to $1 million of prepays every year. We are anticipating at the end of fiscal year 27 that will be around 500,000, but we will not have that in fiscal year 28 if there is no override. There'll be nothing available for prepay at the end of fiscal year 28. Also, to be able to balance things out, we may have to draw down our special reserve fund for 3 years for in 25, 24, and 23. we put in about 650,000 into that account. And that is an account that by law we're allowed to set up that can be used for unexpected special ed expenses. And what those typically are is when you have a student who moves in, say right at the beginning of the year or in the middle of the year that you did not budget for because they require out-of-district placements, that is a reserve that we could draw upon to be able to help us meet those expenses because we would not have budgeted for them. And then finally, the last thing we could possibly do is use more circuit breaker. And the ways we do circuit breaker right now is circuit breaker, for those who aren't aware of it, is the state reimbursement program for special ed expenses. And this is a program that's always on a year lag. So the money that we will get during fiscal year 27 is a reimbursement for expenses that we had in special ed in fiscal year 26. What we try to do is to end the year, to have an end of year balance that is equal to what we got reimbursed in that year. In other words, if we were to get $3 million in fiscal year 27 for our fiscal year 26 expenses, we would end the year at $3 million and use all of that in fiscal year 28. We may have to dig into that theoretical $3 million in fiscal year 28 in order to be able to balance the budget and meet that $4 million overall reduction in expenses that would be necessary if we don't get the override.
Excuse me, Phil, can I just call the FinCom to order because the fifth member just
Yep.
joined?
I'll go right ahead.
So I have to do it by roll call. So if you can just unmute yourself, I'll call Emily.
Present.
Ed Ross.
Here.
Andre Kume.
Here.
I guess I can just acknowledge. And Chris Cook. All right, I see his hand raised, so he's raising his hand there. I don't believe there's any other FinCom members. Sorry to hit your flow, Phil. I just didn't want to be in violation. I'll mute now. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, we go to the next slide, please. So, as we've talked about this over the last month or so as to how we're going to be making our decisions if we have to, if there is no override. This is our philosophy that we put together so far. And as you can see, there's four major points to it. It's value driven, it's going to be collaborative, transparent, and we're going to use every opportunity we can to evaluate how we can improve things, whether it's efficiencies or anything like that. And so one of the values driven, like everything, it's student centered. We are going to work very hard to make sure that we keep as many faces in front of the students as we can. We're also going to be looking for excellence for all students and continuing all our improvements that we have out there, and also continuing our systems for support. And again, to me, you could just line that all up with the first one. It's student-centered. That's what's going to be driving our decision-making as we go forward, whether we have the override, don't have the override. That's how we do it in terms of building our budget. And I think we're going back to the superintendent for the last one. Or am I doing this one, Henry?
I think you're doing that one. We'll finish up.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
can. So the impacts, we've talked about a bunch, particularly as Sharon was saying, like this would be a loss of 5% of our educators. We would see, as a result, an increase of class sizes. This level of a cut would force us to have to rethink the middle school model, which is students are in different teams. We have 2 teams at Parker and 1.5 teams at Coolidge for each grade. It would impact the number of AP and elective offerings at the high schools, the number of specialists and support roles at the elementary school. It would impact the level of support that we offer for that early literacy that is directly connected to our improvement that we spoke about. It would impact our paraprofessionals who are really important in supporting students who do really the ground level work with some of our highest needs students. This would mean fewer tutors, kindergarten professionals, office clerks who know our students and families so well and supporting them, and really speaks to that the school community is more than just what goes on in the classroom. It's the students who need support outside of the classroom. It's the families who need support. when there's a family-related issue, and those paraprofessionals do amazing work there. In terms of administrative work, as Sean had mentioned, we have done a lot of work in terms of adding assistant principals to address the behavior needs of students, which has been varied and has changed due to social and emotional needs of students, particularly since the pandemic. By adding these assistant principals, I've heard this very loud and clear from both families and from administrators, and has allowed for our principals to be able to work with teachers more in the classroom around instructional practices, which is a direct connection to those academic outcomes that we were speaking about. In terms of the extracurricular activities, we would see an increase of fees. We would have to look in terms of the costs that I spoke about in terms of our athletic programs, where those costs are coming from. And we know that it's some of our smaller programs that actually have some of the higher costs. And so that would impact students in terms of participation. We would have to look at our device program. Currently, we do have students who are utilizing laptops from elementary school all the way through high school. They add to added costs for us, and we'd have to rethink that. And as Sean had mentioned, a lot of our curricular programs are now digital, and so it's certainly there would be an impact. And then this question around our reserves, as Phil had mentioned, it just incurs risk on the district if we start tapping into those reserves. Remove safeguards in terms of providing the legally required IEP services, and so therefore, if we do decide to tap into it, and there is a unforeseen cost, we then have to find we are legally required to find the money to pay for it, which then would impact a staffing position. And unexpected placements can run between $65,000 and $400,000 per student, and so tapping again into the money in terms of that circuit breaker money would certainly incur a huge risk for us as a district. I think that's the end of our slides in terms of impacts. We are more than happy to answer your questions. I also wanted to mention that the town manager in her town manager minute put a way to sign up for my office hours. I'm more than happy to meet with community members, families, anyone who's interested in learning more. I'm looking forward to meeting with you and answering your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, town staff and Reading Public Schools staff. So yeah, we're going to do our Q&A now. Quick shout out we do have our website on the readingma.gov. If you want to go, you can take a look. And we also have an email. We created an email for all questions. So after this webinar, if you have just sort of a lingering question tonight, feel free to email us. It is override@readingma.gov. So now we'll do the Q&A. There is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you feel like typing a question, feel free. Also, you can raise your hand to ask a question. I will unmute you. We have 2 questions currently that we received throughout the presentation. I'm just going to read them, and someone can answer. Oh, Marianne. Yes. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm just raising my hand for a question to get in the line for questions. I can wait. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do the typed ones first, then we'll get to the hands. So the first question is from an anonymous attendee. They're asking / stating, this is not something that just happened. Why have we been adding staff and costs to our yearly budget when we knew these costs overruns were happening for years?
Josh, maybe I can take a run at that one just on the school side, given that we talked about added positions. We've taken sort of an invest to save mindset on the school side over the last several years. So where we've added positions, in most cases there was sort of a direct line to, if we add this position, it should drive this outcome, and that outcome should generate savings over time. Sometimes over the short term, that's hard to demonstrate or hard to see, but Dr. Turner alluded to some of those instances. If we are more effective with our tier 2 interventions, we have fewer students referred to special education placements, which are significantly more expensive than a tier 2 intervention. If we catch students with language-based learning disabilities early as a result of the early literacy screener, we have fewer students who need tier 2 and other supports, to sort of successfully progress through the elementary years. So we've tried very hard to, special education is another one. I talked about some of those positions. The ability to have a student who previously may have needed to or opted to go out of district because the services they needed weren't available in Reading, the ability to have those students served here in Reading and even to have students from other districts tuition into Reading is again one of those sort of invest to save opportunities where, yeah, it does come with a, potentially in some cases, a minor increase or a slight increase in staffing levels. But the costs for sending that student out of district or the revenue for bringing a student in district from another district, can offset those investments pretty significantly. So that's been the mindset that we've taken. I'll stop there and open it up if anybody else wants to say anything.
And I'll just add to what Sean was saying is that the number of students who've come back from out of district has increased significantly during this time, which has been a huge cost savings for the district. We had that in a previous slide at our school committee presentation. Happy to answer questions on that.
So on the town side, I think that's an understandable question. It's one, I've heard before. And I'm glad that it was asked, tonight. The financial pressures that we're facing, that many communities are facing, certainly didn't appear overnight. And as we've said earlier in the presentation, over the past several years, all municipalities are responding to growing demand. So that's state and federal mandates, that's inflationary pressures, that's rising health insurance, it's collective bargaining agreements, it's the need to retain staffing. Positions that have been added are usually done through the annual budget process. So there's public hearings, there's approval process that happens there, it goes to town meeting. It's important to note that on the town side, in the last 2 years, I think we added 1 FTE. There was 1 part-time position in Elder and Human Services for a volunteer coordinator that had been funded by ARPA. And we asked that part-time position be funded in the budget. That position is currently vacant and is being held vacant. And then due to an internal promotion. So the staffing hasn't changed at Elder and Human Services, but we're just leaving that position open. And then the other half-time position was one in recreation. That was a part-time position that was made a full-time position. Again, that part-time position was funded through ARPA funds. So on the town side, in the last few years, it's really only been 1 position that we've added in that regard. I think it's important to keep in mind that the broader challenge is that municipal revenues under Prop 2.5 grow at a much slower rate than many of the costs that Reading has to pay. And so that gap widens. Additionally, we've kept most of our budgets level funded. So in all of our departments, we kept either level funded or level services budgets, so modest increases. And as we've done that year over year over year, the margins that are left at the end of the year get thinner and thinner, which reduces how much money is turned back at the end of the year and reduces our free cash regeneration. And it means we can't absorb those shock expenses. So big increases in health insurance, that 39.5% increase in trash, those sort of shock related increases can't be absorbed because we've kept the budget so lean for so many years. Thank you.
Anybody else for this one question? Okay, we're going to do one more written question, then we'll get to you, Marianne. So John Silva asks, the 2.5% represents a higher percentage than the SSA COLA for 10 of the last 15 years. How do they expect seniors to afford this?
Well, I'll jump in on that one. That's a great question. That's a totally fair question. Many of our seniors and those living on fixed incomes feel it keenly when we have property taxes increase. And especially when their income does not keep pace with expenses. An override is not anything that a community should consider lightly, and voters have to weigh very real priorities, keeping taxes as affordable as possible, while also ensuring that essential municipal services like public safety, education, infrastructure, and the programs that we offer residents remain sustainable. So we know that higher taxes are difficult, and the decision has to be made whether those services and investments that are funded by an override provide enough value to justify that cost. We do have many programs available to our seniors on fixed incomes to help reduce the burden. We have that available on our assessing website, but what we will do is add a link on our override website as well, and we'll put more information out to help people who are experiencing difficulty with their taxes. Thank you, Josh. Thank you for the question.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, Marianne.
Hi, thank you. My question is for the schools. Could you go back to the slide of the schools where they were listing the educator, like the 5% of educator cuts? I think it was the slide after this. No, I'm sorry, go back.
Or before?
I think it's the last slide.
It was.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the one.
Very cool.
So I have a question about, it's very troubling that I see educator positions targeted first, and I think about the newly added positions. I guess I'll just get to my point. We have according to the recent Metco presentation, we had 92 Metco students, and we have 9 Metco adjustment counselors. I understand they have a dual role to support other students, but I would hope that we would consider whether we could proportionately decide, do we need 9? Could we get by with 5? I mean, there are 3 Metco students at Woodend, 221 kids there. They have 1 adjustment counselor. There's something like 400 or 500 kids at Parker. I think I had this written down. 12 Metco students there, 19 at Coolidge, and I think they each only have 1 adjustment counselor. I just feel like we could have some elementary schools possibly share them. I feel like looking at where the population of students who need that support is more at the middle and high school. And again, I'm very troubled by getting the concept of getting rid of educators and the middle school model and increasing class sizes. And I appreciate adjustment counselors are a helpful position, but I think they ought to share in the scope of cuts. Maybe that would be planned. The 2023 budget mentioned like 5 adjustment counselors, and now I've looked at the Metco presentation and there's 9 now. So that just feels like a lot for the population. And I'm not trying to target people personally. I want to keep teachers and keep middle school model and keep class sizes. And if we're going to cut there, we should, we would have to cut across the board. Hopefully no cuts, hopefully the override passes, but yeah, that was all I just had to say.
Thanks for the question, Marianne.
Yeah.
The positions that you're referencing would count as educator positions.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. I thought they might be non-educator. Okay, thank you.
No, those would count as educator positions.
Could I just make a couple other comments? So we didn't, so if you see on the page here, this isn't just educators, administration, non-educator positions are listed here as well. There is sort of a mix across those roles that we would anticipate. And I just want to double click on something you did acknowledge, Marianne, which is the Metco adjustment counselors, or the adjustment counselors, while they do support Metco students, that's only a portion of the job. As you sort of rightfully acknowledged, you use Woodend as an example. My kids went to Woodend. The role that he plays there supports every student at Woodend, not just the Metco students. And I do think we should also acknowledge that those roles and the expansion of those roles in particular was funded by an increase in our Metco grant as a result of expanding that program. So while it's true that we are fortunate to be currently in a sort of 1-to-1 position across schools on Metco coordinators, that the cost of those positions is largely being offset, or essentially being offset, by the Metco grant.
It's only 50% being offset, right? Isn't the district paying the other 50%? I mean, I'm adding it up and it's
Yeah,
$500,000.
No, for sure. But again, that's not the entirety of their role is supporting Metco students. So
Right,
that's
but
what I'm
most
getting
of the
at. But
grant is going towards them, and then I don't know how much on transportation. Again, I just feel like it's, and I know your kids went to Wood End, I'm not picking on it, but
no,
it's
I
such a
know.
small school. I feel like they could share a counselor with another school, and the counselors could go to the high school where there's a lot more kids. I don't know.
Yeah, I think as it's probably clear at this point, we're not at the point of identifying specific positions, but certainly non-classroom positions are among those that would be included in these buckets and for consideration. Absolutely.
All right, thank you. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, let me go back to this. Okay, next question that was typed in the Q&A. This is from an anonymous attendee. Why are residents that are elderly on a fixed income with no kids in school assuming the same financial liability as those using full town resources?
I think that Josh, at least I'll start on that. And Sharon, maybe you want to chime in with some of the particulars about Prop 2.5, if necessary. So this is a great question. I know that some states, they don't charge property taxes to folks that are above a certain age or retired. They have different rules. In Massachusetts, we don't have that rule. In Massachusetts, we have to follow the law when we tax folks, and that's what we do in Reading. So we know that there are individuals that are on fixed incomes and that they're small and that sometimes they're not growing in proportion to inflation. But we have to follow the law when we issue taxes through Prop 2.5, and that's not something that we can get away from. Everybody in town benefits from the level of services that we offer. Having excellent school system protects property values, and for many people, their home is their largest investment. And so, part of our mission as a municipality is ensuring that we're protecting that investment, that we offer high quality services that Reading residents have come to expect, so that when you dial 911, you have highly trained professionals that come to your door. When you send your children to our schools, you have highly trained professionals that will educate your children. That is the mission of the community. And we think that Reading residents have come to expect a very high level of services that they get for their precious tax dollars. But we cannot apportion them to how they're used by different populations. We can't charge only school-related costs to people who have children in schools or to children themselves who don't pay taxes. We can't apportion the amount of emergency services only to people that utilize emergency services. So that is not possible. And we all work together to create a just and equitable sharing of our budget to bring forth these quality of services to our residents annually.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
So back when we did our last override, we added a senior tax relief program to help seniors with the last override, and it would still, it's in place every year. You can qualify for it every year. If you qualify for the circuit breaker on the mass tax, you would qualify for our senior tax relief program. So that's one way we try to help the seniors afford these sorts of things. If you haven't heard of that program in the past, that's something you might want to check in with the assessor's office and see if you qualify for that program. Whatever savings seniors get gets redistributed through the tax base to all the other residential taxpayers. So there is an effort within Reading, and I think Reading's only one or two communities that do it in a senior tax relief exemption specifically for seniors. So that's something to consider as well.
Thank you, Sharon. That's a great point. I'm really glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Next question from Mike Monahan. The school annual, or this is for the schools most likely. The school annual report indicates that RPS has 44 athletic coaches at a cost of over $530,000 per year. Is this accurate? And if yes, can this cost be reduced through increased fees?
I'm going to grab onto this one. I guess my first question is for Mr. Moynihan is I'm not sure to what report he's referring. Because we have more than 44 coaches, I know that. And so in the 530,000, that may be close to accurate in terms of the overall expense for coaches, but that's the gross number, and a good chunk of that gets paid for by donations as well as through the user fees. So I don't want to say whether it's accurate or inaccurate. Would like to just to find out where that information is coming from so I can check to make sure that wherever that is, I can be comfortable that whatever is being reported is correct or not.
Yeah, Phil, I think you answered the sort of the sort of the intent of the question. It is an important point to recognize that a lot of the funding of coaches' stipends is from friends of whatever sport, kind of booster clubs, if you will, raising money to fund those stipends, even though it does flow through our budget. And then the second piece, can it be reduced through user fees? Absolutely. I mean, we certainly listed that as one of the likely levers we would pull in the event of a failed override, which is increasing user fees for sports and other extracurriculars, and offsetting coaching expenses is one of the many things that would help support.
I'll just add, one of the challenges of user fees is that we do for students who are not able to afford, we're able to provide waivers for them. The higher the increase we add for a fee, the more potential students we're seeing that would receive the waiver. So there ends up being a point where we can't raise it to such a degree where we're able to meet the total number of costs, or we're not going to get any generate any revenue from those fees.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Next question from an anonymous attendee. Are there ways for the town of Reading to increase revenue via zoning changes and increase more housing development? What AP classes would be cut from the high school curriculum? So sort of a two-part question. We can do the first one with zoning changes and increase more housing development.
I'll jump in on the zoning changes portion of that question. So yes, the answer is yes. Over the long term, increasing commercial and residential tax base through intelligent development is a tool that's available to Reading, but it is not a quick solution. It does not solve an immediate budget challenge. Zoning changes that encourage housing or mixed use development can increase the tax base over time. One of the areas that we're looking into is Eastern Gateway. This is a section of town that is adjacent to the downtown. It incorporates where Market Basket is, it incorporates where RMLD is. And we're doing a lot of work into how we can rezone that area to make it the next economic engine for Reading. Part of the reason the last override lasted so long was because we had put in a new smart growth district in the downtown, and that helped spur new growth in the downtown area. It's important to know that when you have new development, it also creates demands on municipal services. So it increases demands on schools, public safety, public works, and infrastructure. And so we have to be intelligent about how we do this work. But you do receive more tax revenue. So some of the work that we've already done, as I said, with Eastern Gateway, we're also doing some increased work in Walker's Brook area. That's part of a TIP project that's funded mostly by the state. The rest of it's been funded by grants as we go through the design process. And what we know for sure is that when we do these infrastructure improvements, we see development and investment by the private sector along those corridors. People want to be located. Commercial interests want to be located on these upgraded corridors. So that is attractive. It's something that we do the design work, we invest it, we do the zoning change, and then we reap the rewards of that. But it's important to understand that even if we adopted zoning changes for Eastern Gateway right now, the financial benefits of that would take years to materialize. Development requires planning, permitting, financing, construction, and then eventual occupancy before any new tax revenue is realized. So again, it's not an immediate solution. So I think that's a great question. It's something that we need to pay close attention to. And it's also worth mentioning that a few years back, town meeting made some changes to the zoning in the downtown that increased the parking requirements from where it had originally been with smart growth. And we haven't had any new business, building permits issued down there since that work was done. It's very challenging for developers to make those numbers work in that tight of space. And so it's something that we may want to consider looking at again and bring you back to town meeting. Thank you for the question.
I can speak to the AP question. So advanced placement courses are one of the ways in which students can take a rigorous course that is has a national approved curriculum, and students can receive college credit for it. Under Principal Jessica Callanan, the high school has expanded the number of offerings in terms of for AP courses as well as for dual enrollment. And as a result, we have seen more students participating in AP classes. We've seen participation increase. We've also seen performance on the AP test, increase as well. And as Sean had mentioned, we've seen more students getting accepted to some of the most competitive colleges in the country. And as one of what colleges are looking for is for students to take the most rigorous course load that they can handle. And so offering more AP and dual enrollment courses has been advantageous for our students. Additionally, it's allowed for our students to receive college credit potentially, and therefore could be a cost saving for them as they're when they enroll in college. However, AP courses can be some of our smallest courses, small sections. And so therefore, and they've been some of our newest added courses. And so as we are trying to balance class size at the high school, we would have to consider, the principal and her leadership team would have to consider decisions in terms of what courses they can support that have low enrollment. AP courses, there are a number of AP courses that would fall into those categories. So it wouldn't eliminate our AP program, but it could would certainly put at risk some of our AP courses and AP offerings. I'm not sure specifically which ones. Certainly, there would be a process that the principal would work on with her team, and we're not there yet to be able to know that because students they haven't started classes yet for this year, let alone selected which courses they want to take for the FY28 school year.
And I'll just add, well, that may, sound like a sort of easy lever to pull based on Dr. Turner's description there. If you're somebody who's interested in school district rankings, many of the rankings have as a key driver, a key lever in the rankings, a number of students who are taking AP and other advanced coursework, how many tests they're taking, how well they're doing on the tests. So the investments we've made there go a long way towards improving the sort of measurable perception of the district as well.
Okay, thank you. Next question from an anonymous attendee. Should we approve the Proposition 2.5 override vote? What steps will be taken to avoid the same thing in the future? Do you want me to go to the timeline slide?
Okay.
Just to show this. Oh.
Okay. So I'm happy to jump in on this on the town side. One of the things that's found us where we are is the structural deficit that our CFO explained earlier tonight, where a number of these costs that we cannot control have increased far beyond what Proposition 2.5 can support. One of the things we've done to sort of plug the gap for the last number of years is using that term free cash. Free cash is part of our reserves. We have free cash, we have stabilization funds. Those reserves are monies that are turned back and interest income that we get every year. I have proposed to the Finance Committee and the Select Board that we examine adopting a new policy of not using more free cash than the amount of capital we have in our budget every year. So many communities do not invest in capital as part of their annual budget process. They wait until the fall, they wait until the year closes, free cash has been certified by the Department of Revenue, and then they take some of that money and spend it on their capital priorities. In Reading, we do it a little differently, for which we have been rewarded by bond agencies and by the state, and acknowledged as a good practice is that we invest in capital upfront, and we invest 5% of our budget annually in capital and debt payments. This year, as I said earlier, we reduced that to 4.5%. So with a new policy that says we're not going to exceed our capital investments which are one-time expenditures, we won't exceed those one-time expenditures with one-time monies. So if we're spending about $3 or $4 million in capital, we would not exceed that with free cash supplementation. Right now in FY27, we're using $6.475 million in free cash, which is more than we're spending in capital. And so we need to get away from just filling the gap with free cash, especially where we aren't regenerating at that level anymore. And the gap is getting bigger. So that there's a slide that shows that divergence, which started, Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, really in FY23. And part of that is from really just trying to keep the budgets from growing and trying to keep them in that 2.5, 2.75, 3%, 4%. And we can do that with new growth and with Prop 2.5. But when you don't have a lot of new growth, and you have those costs that you can't control, health insurance and so forth, increasing greater than 2.5%, you come to that critical point. So part of I think the work that has to be done is to maintain that free cash discipline, not to exceed our capital expenditures. And, additionally, continuing to monitor that very actively so that we know those triggers earlier on and are more sensitive to them through policy initiatives like this. Sharon, I don't know if you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, I think we'd continue to look at areas where we could negotiate costs down, like we did for property and casualty. We work with the PEC to bring health insurance down. Our budget that you're looking at includes a 10% increase for health insurance, because even though we've worked our agreement over and worked it down, they're still telling us it's likely that it could go up to 10%. That could not be realized, which would be wonderful. But any change that we make with the PEC could help us, in terms of future rates going forward. So we would always entertain any way that we can, any lever that we could pull to try and save money. It's just unfortunate that all of our accommodated costs just seem to blow up all at once. So it's just, it's not like one was up 10% and everything else is up 1% or 2%. Most of these things went up double-digit percentages all at once over the last few years and haven't really settled down that much. And so I'm hoping that that's not a long-term problem. Hoping.
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to type all the questions as well. We have a running Excel. Anyway, all right, next question. The anonymous attendee about the Reading Police Department. So the Reading Police Department has 20 patrol officers, 8 sergeants, a total of 28 employees with 6 managers, the chief, the deputy chief, and 4 lieutenants. In other words, this is 1 management official for every 4 employees. Why have cost reductions not been employed here before we got to this point?
I'll jump on that one. Thank you, Josh. That's a great question. So I spent some time talking with Christine Amendola, who's our deputy chief, about police department staffing. And I am not an expert in police department staffing, but I will do my best to give some information here. First of all, we have 3 shifts for our police department, right? The day shift is 7 to 5, there's a 4 to 12, and there's a 12 to 8. Most day shifts have 4 patrol officers, 1 sergeant, and 1 lieutenant. The night shift has a few more officers, a lieutenant and 1 to 2 sergeants. We utilize a structure like this because the span of control is about 3 to 5 people. This is also how the military is broken down. Many of you may know that Deputy Chief Amendola was in the Army. She was airborne. She jumped out of planes. So she's fascinating. She's really a tremendous professional. But again, that span of control is 3 to 5 people. And so a sergeant typically has 3 people. Lieutenant Brown has the whole night shift and the dispatchers. So there's a range that runs from day to day or shift to shift. But that's typically how it's broken down. That is the more responsible way to staff the department. And I'm confident that the police department is doing an appropriate job with their staffing. They're not looking to increase staffing. It's important to note that during the last override, 4 police officers were added into the police department. If the override were to fail and we needed to look at cuts, we would be looking at cuts across all the departments. We would be looking to be as equitable as we can. But the police department is a highly staffed department. And so there is a risk that that department would lose staffing and take our staffing down below where it was from the 2018 override. And some people may think that that's appropriate. That's a way to do cost savings, and that is, that's one method. But it's important to note that we haven't done a staffing study since before Jordan's Furniture, and so we've had a tremendous amount of investment in the community, more housing that's grown, more density, and that drives more traffic accidents, more petty crime, and all the other attendant needs. So our police department is already stacking phone calls when they're responding to things. They are, responding to multiple car accidents at the same time. They're working on, both sides of the railroad tracks, and they're always managing as trains are coming in and out. And so they do an excellent job, but it's important to note that we do not believe the police department is overstaffed. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna go to the next anonymous attendee, and Marianne already answered. I just want to read it out loud for people that may not be looking at the chat or the Q&A. So, is it true that businesses pay the same rate as residents? If so, has the thought of charging a higher rate for businesses been considered? I believe Burlington does this, and Marianne did put a link to our assessment website and the tax rates for FY26. Does anyone have anything to expand upon this?
That's great, Marianne. I don't know, Sharon, if you want to talk about the CIP shift and what that involves. That is something that's commercial, industrial, and personal property, and the select board votes on that shift every year. So my intro to you.
Yeah, I mean, that the vote is the select boards in terms of how much they want to shift to the commercial tax base. And so that's done every year. And you'll notice that if you look at the rates that we do charge residential and commercial, they are higher for commercial, but not much higher. And I think the idea there is that senior tax relief program that I mentioned, that maybe we're maybe one of maybe 5 communities that do it in Massachusetts. When people are awarded those exemptions, that the money that they save gets redistributed to the residential tax base. So prior to doing that, our tax rates were pretty much the same between residential and commercial. But in order for us to make them somewhat equal, we had to shift some of the tax a little bit onto the commercial because the residential ended up being higher. But right at this point, I believe that the commercial is slightly higher than residential. We do have the ability to shift more to the commercial, but we have such a small commercial tax base that it would probably harm more businesses than it would help residents, because there's only about 8% of our population is commercial and 92% is residential. So it's hard to get anything that's really effectively causing real savings for the residents by shifting such a small commercial base.
Melissa, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and kind of piggyback on what Sharon said. I actually think I thought our commercial, and I was just trying to find my notes from when we did this in the fall. I thought our commercial base was even smaller than that number. I thought we were down by like 6%. So in comparison, particularly to a town like Burlington, which is, I mean, I couldn't even guess what their commercial bases compared to their residential is significantly larger. And like Sharon said, most of our businesses are small businesses. So we'd be really hurting those small mom and pop shops in my opinion, by breaking that or increasing that split tax rate.
Burlington is more like 60-40, with 40% being commercial, so they have a significant commercial tax base.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. It seems, I think, like a follow-up, maybe. Okay, so anonymous attendee going over fees for school-related programs, but you can increase fees for school-related programs in sports, therefore shifting some of the costs towards the residents taking advantage of such programs. And
Josh, I think we addressed that one. It's
Yeah.
absolutely on the table to
Yeah.
consider higher user fees for sure.
And then second part to this, and you might have already answered this, but are the increase in healthcare costs being shared by the employee or being passed on to the taxpayer?
So there is the employees, as health insurance go up, there's a 71-29% shift. So 71% is being paid by the town and 29% is being paid by the employee. And so as the health insurance goes up, so does the employee's share of the health insurance. So that's how that works.
Okay. And then the next anonymous attendee, do we conduct a profitability analysis by department/division to allocate budget amounts, especially where we are today? If yes, how often?
So I'll take that question. And Sharon, you might want to talk a little bit about how we do financing. Municipalities don't conduct profitability analysis in the way that a private business would, because the goal of local government is to provide public services, not generate profits. Most of our essential services, police, fire, public works, libraries, senior services, are intended to meet our community needs rather than produce revenue. So we do regularly evaluate departmental budgets and spending. We do that vigorously through a public process with our department heads internally, and then as we develop and work with the finance committee and the select board, and then eventually with town meeting. So that's a rigorous public process we undertake every year. When financial conditions get more challenging, like they are right now, we evaluate whether services can be delivered more efficiently, and we're always looking for efficiencies. That's not limited to just, tough times. We look at whether vacancies should remain unfilled, which is why I have instituted a hiring freeze. Some vacancies do need to be filled in order to meet the mission. Others, we share the workload for as long as we can. We look at whether certain purchases or capital projects can be deferred, which is why we've reduced our capital budget this year. And we look at whether programs should be modified or reduced. Some programs that we have really need to increase. Our Elder and Human Services programming budget is very small. It's $13,000. It's really not adequate. And we do a great job with the services that we have, with the funding that we have. But we have proposed to increase that under an override budget. So we don't look at whether departments are profitable, but we look to see, are we fulfilling the public purpose? And can we do that as efficiently as possible?
Yeah, I would agree. And we're not like a for-profit business. It's more like a not-for-profit. We budget our revenues to equal our expenses. So we project our revenues first, and then we build our budget around what we project we'll be collecting. There isn't a focus on a net income, so to speak. We're trying to provide a service and not create a profit.
Can I just add, on the school side, we do have a number, maybe there's a corollary to this. We do have a number of programs and expense items that are intended to be sort of self-funding. So I'm thinking about things like extended day, where we provide before or after school care for students. We do annually, as part of our budget process, look at how the revenues coming in for those are supporting the costs that then get allocated to those programs. So we're, again, annually, as part of the budget process, trying to ensure that we are setting fees appropriately to absorb the costs associated with those programs, and that they're not being subsidized, if you will, by the operating budget. Food
And
services
the
is
law,
another one.
and
of
the law
them.
mandates that we don't charge more than what it really costs to run.
That's right. Yeah, we're
We're supposed
legally
to
not
run like
allowed
a
to.
not-for-profit, yeah.
Right. We're legally not allowed to sort of drive a profit out of those things. But we are carefully looking at ensuring that we're not subsidizing those programs unduly either.
I will add that our treasurer, as our CFO will tell you, has worked very hard to manage our investments so that we can maximize whatever interest income we can. And that's something that she's exceptional at doing. We're not allowed to make too much money in interest. That's an arbitrage issue. That's some inside baseball, that we can't borrow money for, like the Killam and the Recal projects, and then make too much money off the interest. So we don't do that. But our treasurer really does an exceptional job there to maximize interest income. Thank you, Josh.
Okay, so at this time, there are no hands up and there are no typed Q&A. Oh, no, one just popped up. Okay. Oh, there's two. All right, question. All righty, anonymous attendee. This is more of a comment than a question. I appreciate the town of Reading prioritizing capital and infrastructure maintenance like streets, parks, and DPW work. Those costs spent make this town desirable and valuable. Thank you. Oh, all right. Mary Ann.
Agreed.
Wanted to point out that in the chat, there's a question, not in the Q&A, from a Steve Matrullo. So he's one of the panelists, but he didn't raise his hand. I don't know if he wants to ask his question or I can read it. I just have
You can read it if you want. Yeah.
His question says, what has been done to compare the cost increases you've specified with nearby towns of similar size and characteristics to convince taxpayers you've negotiated the best services agreements you can?
That's a great question. A lot of what we do is competitively bid. So we go out on the market and we competitively bid that. We often base our estimates on what other communities have received for similar projects. So we look at paving, we look at all those things, and then that's how we develop the budgets for various projects or annual requirements. We also buy off the state contract, which lots of people do. We have a number of state contracts where the procurement's sort of already been done. That eases the procurement process and helps drive down costs for taxpayers. Procurement is competitive. It is highly governed. There are many, many laws that govern it, and it is a practice that we take very seriously. We have a number of people that have become NCPPO qualified in our town hall so that we make sure that we are always covered when it comes to procurement. But that's a great question, and it's something that we could dig into more and put on our website to help reassure folks that we competitively bid, we drive down costs, and we work very hard to always achieve the most value for our taxpayer dollars.
And
Jane, can I
also,
just-
I would just add, oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead, Sharon. I was going to switch gears
I
to
was
school
just going to
side.
say that we do a lot of reviewing. DLS maintains data on all of our peer communities, the whole state of Massachusetts. And so when we're looking to compare ourselves with others, there's a wealth of information on the DLS website that we utilize to see what we're spending in a certain area compared to our peer communities or the communities we consider to be very closely related to us. And some of the slides the school department show that because they're showing you kind of our peer communities in terms of what they do for per pupil spend and what we're doing here in Reading. We're getting great results for less dollars. So we're really spending our dollars very efficiently is what that shows me. So we do a lot of analysis in that way where we compare ourselves to peer communities of a similar size. For different topics, depending on what we're looking at. And in that case, they were showing you kind of information you probably get from the DESI website of a similar nature.
Sean.
No, Sharon said it well.
Sean.
I was just going to sort of refer to the benchmarking that we do against peer communities for sure. Yep.
Okay, next
Great
question. Oh, yeah. Going forward, have we thought about offering naming opportunities for buildings like the new senior center and portions of school buildings, such as in the PAC and sports fields, etc., or seating in the PAC, that is. So maybe like chairs or sections.
Sure. I can't speak to the school department side. I know they have a detailed naming program. We're modeling it on the town side, as well as for, advertising on school fields and so forth, or on town fields rather. We're looking into doing a naming policy, and the select board's already talked about it once. It'll be coming up at least one more time in the near future. So that's a great question. That's something the select board's been talking about for at least the last 8 months, if not a little bit longer. And so that draft policy has been written, and Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we took it up in June. If people want to go back and watch that meeting, we've had that preliminary conversation so far. It's a great question.
Yes, you're right, Jane. We took it up in June.
Yeah, and on the school side, Jane alluded to this, but we do have a policy that allows us to name buildings and other facilities, sort of in consideration for monetary gifts. So that possibility is already there. I wouldn't say it's something we've actively solicited in the past, but it's certainly a possibility. We did have a recent case where we received a sizable donation that allowed us to make a essentially renovate the some of the training facilities for students and athletes at the high school, which was entirely funded by a donation. And there's a likely to be a facilities naming on the tail end of that. So that's definitely a consideration on the school side. The other thing that we've talked about, which is sort of in the same vein, is creating more opportunities for selling advertising space, on athletic fields, for instance. If you go to some local high schools, you'll see just dozens and dozens of businesses advertising on the outfield fences and things like that. And we've got a little bit of that, but there's maybe some some opportunities to drive some minor incremental revenue as a result of that as well. It wouldn't be game changing, but everything's on the table.
Okay. At this time, I see no hands up. There are no typed question and answers. Maybe give it like 30 more seconds.
I'll just take a minute to
Yeah.
thank everybody who's
Yes.
stayed with us through almost 9 p.m. This has been a great 2 hours. I'm really grateful personally for the questions that have come tonight. We want to hear more of your questions. Please send them to override@readingma.gov. I get those emails. Sharon gets those emails. A few other people do too. It helps us make sure that the FAQs that we're communicating to the town are complete, and we're looking for your questions. So, we welcome them. I look forward to seeing you in some in-person forums that we'll be having. And again, thank you for your time and attention this evening. We have a lot of staff and volunteers, elected officials on tonight, giving up their Thursday nights. We're going to be doing a lot more of this together. And it's really important that we take the time to reach you and answer every one of your questions.
Similar,
Thank you, Brian.
and similarly, I just want to say thank you for coming out on August evening. This is really a demonstration of the level of seriousness in this community, and I'm grateful to be a part of it. We are going to be a part of these meetings along with the town. We'll have school committee members attending. We'll also try to have some principals also for people who have not had children in the schools for a while to understand what's going on in our schools. So we're here to answer your questions and to help you to see what's going on the school side and the great work that has been happening over the last couple of years. So thanks again for coming out tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And before we leave, I think we need to close or adjourn the select board and FinCom. We'll do select board first. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yes, I do want to quickly piggyback on Dr. Turner and Jane's comments about, just appreciative of all the residents that joined us tonight, just to get all the factual information. And hopefully we see this large of a group in all of our upcoming forums. So I am going to adjourn the select board meeting. Chris Haley.
I'll second that, and then I will vote yes.
Karen Durskillis.
Yes.
Melissa Murphy, yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Move to adjourn the Finance Committee.
Second.
I'll do a roll call. Thank you. Emily,
Yes.
Ed,
Yes.
Andre, And Chris, you can just like raise your hand
Yes.
virtually, I see. Thank you. Okay, we are.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Oops.